He has outlasted 10 Democratic presidential candidates so far. And he has also qualified for every Democratic presidential debate since June and is one poll away from qualifying for December. He's running on multiple campaign slogans, including Humanity First, Make America Think Harder, which is cleverly abbreviated to MATH, and Not Left, Not Right, Forward. His signature campaign issue is to establish a universal basic income where every American adult over the age of 18 would receive $1,000 every month. His message has spawned a loyal band of followers who call themselves the Yang Gang.
So much Yang Gang love here in South Carolina. I love it.
And he is married.
If you're just Yang curious, you're like, what have I stumbled into?
He's married to his wife Evelyn, and they have 2 sons, including their eldest, who is autistic. Let's welcome Andrew Yang.
Thank you, South Carolina.
Yes. All right. So we'll get started. So as Caitlin mentioned, you have outlasted a bunch of candidates, folks who are senators, governors, members of Congress, folks with a whole lot of political experience who are beating a bunch of other folks with a bunch of experience in the polls right now. So our first question is just from the inside perspective, from being the candidate, how did you get here? How did we reach that point where you've beaten all those folks?
First, let me say the goal is not to outlast, the goal is to win. But to your question, Jamie. So, I spent 7 years helping create thousands of jobs around the country, and I saw firsthand that we are blasting away the most common jobs in our society. We got rid of 4 million manufacturing jobs that were primarily in Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, and Iowa. You all lost about 60,000 here in South Carolina, and it's devastated many communities that have not recovered. So I saw this developing, and I said, okay, we're scapegoating immigrants for problems that immigrants have nothing to do with. And what happened in these manufacturing plants is now migrating to retail, call centers, fast food, truck driving, and on through the economy. How many of you have seen a self-serve kiosk at a fast food restaurant like McDonald's? Every McDonald's in the country will have one by 2021, and they're going to start shifting to the back of the house. How many of you have noticed stores closing around where you live in South Carolina? And why are those stores closing? Amazon. Amazon's soaking up $20 billion in taxes every single year. And how much are they paying in taxes? Zero. That's your math, South Carolina. 20 billion out, zero back. 30% of your stores and malls close. And the most common job in your state is retail clerk. Average retail clerk's a 39-year-old woman making between $9 and $10 an hour. So your question as to how the heck I got here, I'm talking about the real problems on the ground that Americans can see. And I knew politicians wanted nothing to do with this. If you were generous, you would say they don't understand it, because they don't understand technology's impact on the economy and the labor force. If you were ungenerous, you would say they just don't care, because their incentives have nothing to do with actually solving our problems or improving our lives. They just go from cable news hit to cable news hit, fundraiser to fundraiser, and the Washington wheel keeps on turning, regardless of what happens in our communities. So I was very, very confident that if I talked about the real problems that we were experiencing day to day and proposed real solutions that Americans could tell would actually improve our way of life, that we would grow and grow. And thanks to the Yang Gang, I've been proven right at every turn. So thank you all so much.
On the debate stage in Atlanta this week, you spoke for 6 minutes and 48 seconds, which is the least of any of the 10 candidates who qualified. Realistically, what is your plan to make voters take you seriously, and the media?
Well, if you look at the polls afterwards and the ratings, I was declared one of the winners of the debate despite talking less than the other candidates. And I don't think Americans correlate like who can blather the most with like, oh, that's my president. You know? If that's the case, we'd have a totally different, well, I mean, maybe, you know, I just didn't go too far on that one. But we've won every debate in terms of the number of supporters. We raised $1 million after 2 of the last debates because Americans recognize the truth when they hear it. When someone's talking about what we can see around us every single day, then this campaign gains energy and strength. And that happened after the debate on Wednesday, regardless of my airtime. I will say that it was confusing, because I'm like, yo, I'm right here. Like, my wife was in the arena with me, and so she saw me go through this progression where I went from like raising a hand, and then I did the raise both hands moves, which is kind of awkward. And then I did the I'm just gonna start talking move. You know, it's like a progression of moves you make when you're up there. And so it was something that I think objective observers would look at and say, like, that does not make sense given the fact that I'm 5th or 6th in national polls, qualified for every debate. And I'm happy to say that our impact is not correlated to airtime either on Wednesday or in any of the past debates.
Amen. The New York Times has called you the internet's favorite candidate. You have been extremely popular on Reddit. You had a very popular episode of the Joe Rogan podcast. You've had.
Did you watch that as homework?
I did. Nice. I'm curious whether you think that your candidacy and how far you've gotten would have been possible without the internet, and the impact that availability to a crowd like this has made on politics and on campaigning in the 21st century.
I owe a great debt to what you'd consider independent voices outside of the cable news networks and mainstream media. I declared my candidacy in early 2018, and it's not like the cable news channels were like knocking down the door being like, we gotta get Yang on. like that was not the situation. And so I sat down with various podcasters online and interviewers, people like Sam Harris and Stephen Dubner of Freakonomics and Joe Rogan and The Breakfast Club, people that would have me on that had very, very wide listenership, but were from outside of the cable news bubble. And we would not be where we are, certainly without those people, those conversations. And that's one reason why we've been growing every period independent of media mentions. If you look at our ratio of polling support to media mentions, we're something like 12 times like the next person. So this is a 21st century campaign, and certainly we would never be where we are if not for the media opportunities that exist now that did not exist in yesteryear. I also want to give a shout out to the work. It's the Russians. I also want to give a shout out to the work you all are doing on Post and Courier. Local journalism is so vital to a functioning society and a functioning democracy, and over 1,000 newspapers have gone out of business around the country because they used to have classified ads, now you don't have that. Now, you were very fortunate that you're actually a family-owned paper, and most of the papers have gotten gobbled up by conglomerates and private equity firms that then just trying to standardize the reporting, and just everything revolves around the almighty dollar. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the journalism and the work you all do.
Appreciate that.
In a way, you all are independent journalism.
We are.
Yeah, you are. Like that's a real thing, so thank you for that.
Well, tell us a little bit about your time in law. You called being a lawyer in an article, quote, the 5 worst months of my life. Why was that?
That was me joking around, because I've certainly had like worse times in my life. But I found practicing law to be a bad fit because my job seemed to be imagining the worst things that could happen and then incorporating them into a document. So imagine you're like 24, 25 years old. It's like, why am I spending all my time thinking about terrible things? It's like, shouldn't I be trying to do something positive or build something positive? At that time, I did not fully realize how difficult it was to build something positive. It turns out sitting in an office, writing up contracts for big corporate transactions is a lot easier in some ways than trying to build a business or start a nonprofit or any of those things. But I found that building something, though it was hard and harder, it was much more rewarding on other levels. And I thought that leaving that law firm job was going to get harder over time, not easier. And so I thought, well, I'm in my 20s, I don't have a family yet, I don't have any of that stuff, like if I'm ever going to take a risk, now would be the time.
And for the first time, we're seeing that there are 3 Asian American and Pacific Islanders seeking a major party's nomination for president. Yourself, Senator Kamala Harris, and Representative Tulsi Gabbard. Now tell us, how have your own personal experiences as an Asian American man shaped how you approach issues of race in America?
I'm very proud to be the first Asian American man to run for president as a Democrat. It's very exciting. At the same time, my campaign is focused on issues that apply to all of us, that are independent of my identity. I think growing up the son of immigrants in this country, the skinny Asian kid who skipped a grade, who had braces, and they hadn't invented cool glasses yet, so I had like the big Coke bottle glasses, like walking around. I thought everyone's dad had a PhD, so I was like, what's your dad's PhD? And then I learned the hard way, and they're like, wow, it's like, I'll give you a PhD. Like, oh, what did I say wrong? So, I know, like, growing up, that kid certainly gave me some degree of empathy for people who feel like the odd person out, or the person who's on the sideline, because I felt like I was on the sideline for a lot of my childhood. Though what I say to communities around the country is like, I know what it's like to have words used against me, but certain groups of people in this country have something much harsher and more powerful working against them, which are numbers. Numbers are much more crushing and cruel than words. And so my background certainly, I think, has given me sensitivity to some sets of issues, but others, like many Americans, you can just sort of try and understand in the abstract because you don't know what that's like in your own life.
All right, so we're going to move on to a topic that we got probably 100 questions from the audience about. 95% of the questions we got were about UBI. Yes.
Yeah, Freedom Dividend.
Which tests better, I understand.
Yes, Freedom Dividend tested much better than any other name we had for it.
There you go. So, let's talk about this plan. If the first criticism a lot of folks who have not sort of studied the details of this will say is, if everyone's getting $1,000, including billionaires, including Donald and Ivanka Trump, how is that fair and progressive? What's your answer to that?
Well, first let me say this is not an old idea. This is not a new idea, and it's not my idea. Thomas Paine was for it at the founding of the country, called it the Citizens Dividend. Martin Luther King fought for it in the 60s, called it the Guaranteed Minimum Income. And it is what he was fighting for when he was assassinated in 1968. It passed the U.S. House of Representatives twice in 1971. It was endorsed by 1,000 economists. And one state passed a dividend where now everyone in that state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year, no questions asked. And what state is that? And how do they pay for it? And what is the oil of the 21st century? Technology, AI, big data, self-driving cars and trucks. What they're doing in Alaska with oil money, we can do for everyone in the country with technology money. So this is an idea that's deeply American and has been with us the whole time. And we are going through the greatest economic transformation in our country's history, the Fourth Industrial Revolution. When's the last time you heard a politician say the words Fourth Industrial Revolution? Just now. So, in this context, the Freedom Dividend becomes much more not just reasonable, but necessary and inevitable. And so the question is, if you put $1,000 a month into everyone's hands, that has a huge impact on the 78% of Americans who are living paycheck to paycheck, or the 47% of Americans who can't afford an unexpected $500 bill. If you give people $12,000 a year, and that person's making $12,000 a year, that's like a game changer. If the person's Bill Gates, he wouldn't even notice. You'd like stick like a, try and like get another $1,000 into one of his accounts. It'd have like zero impact. But the great thing is if you put it into the majority of our hands, the money's just going to go right back into our communities every single day. It's going to be spent on daycare and car repairs and local businesses and local organizations. This is the trickle-up economy from our people, our families, and our communities up. It's not meant to solve every problem, but if you look at the Bill Gateses of the world, my system would have the Bill Gateses paying hundreds of millions of dollars into the system. So if you try and send Bill $1,000 a month, it doesn't matter. And one of the reasons why it's so popular in Alaska is that everyone looks and says, this is fair. Everyone gets the $1,000, and there's no, you get it, I don't. There's no stigma attached to it. It's just a universal right of citizenship that we all enjoy.
But what about the criticism that, wouldn't the markets just respond accordingly? If everybody's pockets deepened by $1,000, why wouldn't that affect my rent? Why wouldn't that affect the cost of gas or these other services and things that people pay for?
So there are three core sources of inflation in American life. Unfortunately, there are the three big ones that make us miserable: housing, education, and healthcare. None of these are really based around the fact that we have tons and tons of money. Like, why did college get 2.5 times more expensive? Is it because all the parents got rich? Like, no. The parents here are like, no. The students here are like, no. Like, why have we piled it up? It's because parents feel like they have no choice but to pay, and the business model of the university is just to keep on ratcheting prices up as they hire more administrators. Healthcare, the same thing. Prices only go up. They just keep passing costs along, and then you feel like you have no choice but to pay. So putting $1,000 a month into our hands helps us manage the worst causes of inflation in those three areas. It increases our buying power. And in all of the other industries where there's actual competition and price sensitivity, you would not see price spikes. I'll give you a couple of data points. Number one, you remember voting for the $4 trillion bailout of Wall Street? No, none of us voted for that. But was there massive inflation afterwards? Also no, because you pumped all this money into the system and there was still very competitive pricing competition in food, clothing, media, electronics, cars, like all of those things, the prices have not gone up. The prices have gone up in housing, education, and healthcare because of dysfunction in those markets, not because of buying power in our hands. If you put money into our hands, it actually helps us mitigate the worst of inflation. It does not increase it.
And then just to follow up, how long would you envision this plan lasting? Would there be a sunset provision on it? Do you want it to continue indefinitely? Something else?
I would. They started the dividend almost 40 years ago, and now, 39 years later, Alaskans love it, has improved children's health, has created hundreds of jobs, has decreased income inequality, and a majority of Alaskans, who are not exactly people that love taxes, said they would accept higher taxes to continue funding the dividend. So as long as it's working for the American people, and we love it, then there's no reason why you would discontinue it. I have a feeling that after the Freedom Dividend is in place, it will become the favorite thing that, for most Americans, on what the government does. And as a parent too, I've got 2 young boys, one of whom is autistic. Imagine being a parent and knowing that your kids are getting it $1,000 a month when they turn 18. And then you have financial literacy classes their senior year in high school. Do you think they'll pay attention? Yeah. Just a brief aside, it is impossible to teach anyone financial literacy if they do not have money. It's impossible. But if they're getting money and you teach them financial literacy, they're going to be all over that. They'll be like so attentive. And for a parent, you would know that your kid actually has a foundation. Whoa. Wow. Has a foundation moving forward. And that $1,000 a month can partially pay for college if they decide to go. We should not pretend that every kid goes to college, though. Only 1/3 of Americans are going to graduate from college. That's one reason it's like, I get like the, hey, like, you know, like college, but like if 2/3 of your people are not going to go to college, why are you subsidizing something for the top third? We need to invest massive resources in vocational, technical, apprenticeships, and trade schools. Thanks, Caitlin. Oh wait, I'm back. Right now, only 6% of American high school students are in technical tracks or apprenticeships. In Germany, that's 59%. Think about that gulf. You know, like what should it be in the US? A lot higher than 6%. But as usual, we're taking the easy way out. It's harder to train our kids in the trades, so we throw them in the classroom with a teacher and some textbooks and pretend they're going to go to college. It's doing our kids a disservice. We're overprescribing college. Kids are pursuing college that should not be pursuing it, and then they're graduating with life-changing debt. Or even worse yet, not graduating. 41% of people who start college will not finish within 6 years. And do you think the universities forgive that debt? Of course not. They're like, oh, you didn't graduate? Like, you know, that's on you. That's not on the 18-year-old or the 20-year-old. That has to be on us to create better paths forward for all of our people, not just people who go to college.
How much are you expecting the Freedom Dividend to cost? And I understand that one of your key pay-fors is value-added tax. Can you explain what a value-added tax is and why you think that's the right way to go?
So Amazon's paying zero in federal taxes here in the US, and it's not just them. A lot of the biggest companies are paying zero or near zero in taxes. So then you look around the world and say, okay, there are other smart countries, how do they prevent that from happening? And most every other developed country already has what's called a value-added tax in place, which would give us a tiny toll, a tiny slice of every Amazon sale, every Google search, every Facebook ad, every robot truck mile. Because our economy is so massive and these companies are throwing up so much value, even a mild value-added tax generates over $800 billion in new revenue very, very quickly. Every other smart country has done this. We should too. Why do we not talk about it? Because the companies have bought and sold our government. Because our government doesn't care about actually trying to get us our fair share from the Amazons of the world. Like Amazon literally, freaking Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post now. He's like hanging out there. Like, and someone talked to, like, someone I know who, like, is friends with Jeff, said that Jeff knows there is one threat to his business, the US government. And so, you know, you think it's a coincidence that he's decided to, like, locate HQ2 in the DC metro area and bought the Washington Post? It's like the one threat he has to neutralize. So that's what we have to keep from happening, South Carolina. We have to make sure we get our fair share from the Amazons of the world. And if we do that, we can afford this dividend of $1,000 a month because we get the money back in myriad ways. There are 3 ways. Number 1, you put the money in your hands, you spend it here in South Carolina. Do you think you're going to go to the Palmetto Brewing Company a little bit more often? Yeah. Yeah, someone here is like, yeah. So if enough of you go, do you think the Palmetto Brewing Company needs to hire another server, another bartender, another salesperson or 2? And then you extrapolate that across all of the local businesses and even the new businesses that might take shape. Do you think people will be more likely to start a new business in a context where everyone was getting $1,000 a month? Yeah, 100%. I've worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs around the country, and you're much more likely to try and start something new if you feel like your basic needs are accounted for and you're not going to starve to death if it fails. So you have this economic growth that gives you back hundreds of billions of dollars over the economy.
Yeah, let's switch.
Sorry.
Trade.
I'll let you have my mic too.
All right.
Thank you. Caitlin's mic, awesome.
Much better. Much better.
So number 1, we get the money back through the trickle-up economy. Number 2, we save money on things like incarceration, homelessness services, emergency room healthcare. There was a corrections officer in New Hampshire who said this to me. He said we should pay people to stay out of jail because it costs so much when they're in jail. This is a prison guard. And he saw up close that we were spending tens of thousands of dollars per inmate on everything, and he was like, this is not the best use of public money. And number 3, if you put this money into our hands, our families become stronger, healthier, mentally healthier, less stressed out, relationships improve, arguments go down, domestic violence goes down. There was one study that showed that putting this money into our hands would increase our GDP by $700 billion a year just in better health and education outcomes. So we get back a lot of the money in the trickle-up economy. The trickle-down economy has never worked. And even the Republicans who have been championing it actually knew on the side. It's like, hey, this is actually not going to work, but it's a good story. The trickle-up economy would work. You put the value-added tax in place, get us our fair share of the Amazons of the world, we can pay for a dividend of $1,000 a month because we're going to get the value back over and over again.
So the rationale for this is in large part based on sort of a prediction of where the economy is going. That we're going to have massive technological unemployment. You talked about kiosks at McDonald's, truck drivers being automated out of their jobs. But you know, there have been economists and other folks who have been predicting massive unemployment due to technology for an extremely long time. I mean, pretty much since the cotton gin. John Maynard Keynes predicted that there was going to be a ton of unemployment because of agriculture, losing jobs. And yet we've always found a way to adjust and create new industries, create new jobs. Why were the previous generations wrong, and why do you think you're right?
I'd say two big things. Number one, kind of like a zone of silence around.
The blackout continues.
The blackout continues. That's funny. You would never do that here in the Post and Courier. So number one, the thing that's driven me to such conviction is that I looked at the underlying numbers, and the adjustment that people imagine would happen, where it's like, oh, people will shift and find new industries and new opportunities, is not happening in real life on the ground right now. Of the 4 million manufacturing workers that lost their jobs, in the Midwest, half of them left the workforce and never worked again. And then of that group, half filed for disability. And you then saw surges in suicides and drug overdoses in those communities, to the point that America's life expectancy has now declined for the last 3 years in a row, because suicides and drug overdoses have both overtaken vehicle deaths as cause of death in this country for the first time. Do you know the last time America's life expectancy declined for 3 years in a row? The Spanish flu of 1918. You have to go back 100 years to a global pandemic to find a time when our life expectancy declined for 3 years in a row. You want more evidence? Rates of business formation have gone to multi-decade lows in 80% of the country. Interstate migration rates, multi-decade lows. So if you imagine that our people are somehow miraculously rearranging ourselves into the economy of the future, we are not. Like, just all you have to do is actually start tracing the numbers and being like, this does not look like a labor force that's shifting itself and starting new businesses and moving across state lines and doing all of the things that you imagine we would need to do in a time of unprecedented change. That's number one. Number two, there has never been artificial intelligence before. This is a different order of magnitude of transition ahead. And it's not just me. MIT, Bain, McKinsey, the Obama White House, they looked at it and said this is going to be 2 to 3 times faster and more dramatic than the first industrial revolution at the turn of the century in terms of number of workers displaced. And the first industrial revolution at the turn of the century included mass riots that killed dozens of people and caused billions of dollars worth of damage. It led to Labor Day as a holiday in response to riots, trying to like pacify people. It led to labor unions coming into existence in the late 1880s. And then we instituted universal high school in 1911, in part as a response to economic change. So if you think this industrial revolution is going to be 2 to 3 times faster and more vicious than that one, even based on our history, you would expect widespread, frankly, unrest and despair and some kind of massive social response. So to me, it's deeply frustrating when someone's like, oh, you know, we've been through this before. It's like, are you kidding me? I'm friends with some of the foremost technologists in this country, and you know a conversation we never have? I know what's going on at the cutting edge in our labs in artificial intelligence, and everything's going to be fine. That is never the conversation. It's, I have deep knowledge of what's going on with AI, and it's going to be bad. I spoke to a group of 70 CEOs in New York City, and I asked them, how many of you are looking at replacing your back office clerical workers with artificial intelligence and software? Guess how many hands went up out of 70? All 70. The truth is you could fire any of the CEOs that didn't have their hand up. Because if you are the CEO of a business and someone comes to you and says, I can replace hundreds of your workers with software, you have to do that deal. That's the nature of the system that we have built. Our system is built around capital efficiency and stock market prices. It is not built around our own well-being. Again, our life expectancy is declining while corporate profits go up. There is a 20th century understanding of an economy that has stopped applying. It was that if a company makes lots of money, it has to hire lots of people, has to treat them well, has to give them benefits, has to care about what happens in its own backyard. Today, none of those things is true. You can build a profitable company, not hire lots of people. If you do hire them, you can make them all temp gig or contractors. That's why 94% of the new jobs in America are temp gig or contract workers. You don't have to care about what happens in your backyard because you can sell everywhere. So we have to stop pretending that it's 1970 and start rewriting the rules for our people to address the challenges of 2019.
We're going to shift gears now to one of my favorite parts of the Pints of Politics program. One, sound technical difficulties, that always happens. And two, the 90-second question. We ask this of everybody who comes on stage with us. The way it works is in 90 seconds, we're going to ask you to give us your plan for your first 100 days. You will be timed. Are you ready?
Sure.
All right, and go.
So I want you all to imagine Inauguration Day 2021. Andrew Yang is the president. Thank you, South Carolina, because you would have made it happen. And the Democrats and progressives are so pumped to have beaten Donald Trump. They look around and being like, wow, we did it. We took a bet on Andrew Yang and it worked. And we'll all know why I won. It's because of this vision of a 21st century economy that works for us in the Freedom Dividend. So everyone will be like, Freedom Dividend. The Democrats will say, yeah, this will make children and families stronger. But then the Republicans will look up and say, wait a minute, do I hate the dividend? Alaska's the only state with one. I don't hate putting more money into Americans' hands. What Republicans hate is a giant bureaucracy that makes everyone's decisions for them. So in the first 100 days, what we're going to do is we're going to get the Freedom Dividend across the finish line, and then Americans will have this feeling you have not had in a long time. You'll be like, wow, the government did something I love. I love the Freedom Dividend. And then we'll look at each other, we'll remember that we're all Americans and in it together, and then we'll try and solve the other big problems of this era after we get the boot off of our throats.
All right, you did it with 20 seconds to spare.
Deval Patrick getting into the race has spurred some criticism from Democrats about the private equity industry. You are an entrepreneur, or serial entrepreneur. You know the value that private investment has, the access to private investment has. Do you think that criticism of Bain has been fair? If so, why? If not, why?
I referenced this a moment ago. If you're the CEO of a company, you have essentially one variable you're judged by, and that's the bottom line of the company. So if you buy a company and you find that firing thousands of people will help the bottom line, then you do it. And that's essentially the private equity playbook. That's why people are angry at private equity firms, is that their playbook is, I buy a company, I strip out the costs, which are generally people, I repackage the company, pretty it up, and then sell it to someone. Now, can you be angry at Bain for doing this? It depends upon who you blame for the incentives of our system. No, if you think our system is messed up, which it is, and we need to rewrite the rules so that it's not corporate profitability that guides us, but our own health and well-being, our mental health and freedom from substance abuse, how our kids are doing, how clean our air and water are, that will be the new GDP under my administration, and then we can get the measurements right so we can move in the right direction. But if you look at a private equity firm that was operating under just this one variable system, you can blame the system, you can blame the individuals involved. The way I would think of it is that they're mercenaries. And it's like, do you hate mercenaries? It depends upon your point of view. But I wouldn't blame Deval. I would blame the set of incentives that have made it so that one of the main ways to get rich in this country is buying and selling other companies and firing the staff.
The number one issue in every poll of Democratic primary voters in South Carolina is health care. There have been variations of, everyone on that stage the other night wants to expand healthcare coverage in some way. There have been variations about how exactly to do it. What is your version of how to do it?
I am so frustrated by the conversations around healthcare because everyone's like, how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? And what I'm going to say to you is what you all already know. We are already paying for it through the nose. We're paying for it in the fact that we can't switch jobs if we want. We're paying for it because 94% of the new jobs don't have benefits. We're paying for it because all of our prices are higher. We're paying for it because people are stressed out about whether they should afford their insulin versus their rent. We're paying for it because it's the #1 cause of bankruptcy in this country. But I'm a numbers guy. We're spending $3.6 trillion on our healthcare right now, and 30% of it is waste. Like $1 trillion of waste. So why is there so much waste in the system? It's because our system is not designed to make us stronger and healthier. What's it designed for? To make the drug companies, the insurance companies, the device companies lots and lots of money. And I have a friend who's a brilliant financial analyst, and she went through the books of these companies, and she said she has never seen price gouging and profiteering at this scale in her life. She says it's so extreme and unsustainable that she's shorting all of those companies, and then she made a donation to my campaign because she says this cannot continue. So we are already paying for it. I'm for a Medicare for All plan that does not get rid of private insurance wholesale. The goal has to be to demonstrate to the American people that this public option is superior to what you're currently paying for, and then have us squeeze out the private insurers by demonstrating that value over time. But I'm not concerned about the cost because we have so much waste and excess in the system that if you rationalize prices, at least you're going to end up getting access up and prices down very, very quickly. And the folks that are going to be feeling the squeeze are the drug companies, the device companies, and the private insurance companies that are essentially right now a hidden tax on the American people. And they're so powerful that they're confusing the political conversation around it. But as someone who's dug into the numbers, this is something that we can improve on through even the most basic change in incentives.
You've also suggested in your healthcare plan either free or heavily subsidized marriage counseling for all, which is pretty unique.
That's not technically in the healthcare plan, but go on.
But it's on your website and your policy.
No, it's very much. Yeah. Like, I mean, I love free marriage counseling. I'm just saying it's not.
So why is that important to you as a candidate?
How many of y'all are parents like me? All right. So I'm going to speak. I can go by the facts, and then I can go from my own experience. So the facts are that if you grow up in a two-parent household, the kid has a higher chance of many positive outcomes in terms of their education, their employment, social indicators, etc. So if you're a society and you look around and say, hey, if I have a chance to make it so a kid grows up in a two-parent household as opposed to one, I should do that. And so if it's like a relatively low cost of subsidizing or making free marriage counseling, and you increase that likelihood even like a smidgen, that's a win for society. On a personal level, my wife and I had our first son 7 years ago, Christopher, and I was blown away by how stressed out and exhausted me and my wife were. It was exacerbated by the fact it turns out that Christopher was autistic, which we did not know, and you don't discover until he's a little bit older. But I remember thinking, when we had our second son, Damien, I was like, I knew it was not normal for a kid just to wake up and start screaming. Because Christopher would wake up and just scream as if he was just very, very upset at the world every day, and it was very, very stressful. And so my wife and I went through this journey together, and it tested us as individuals, it tested our marriage. And we're very, very fortunate in the scheme of things where we had some family around us and some support, and there are two of us and the rest of it. So I can very easily see families that get torn apart, or people that maybe had a kid together but weren't married and they're trying to make it work, and then the barriers and the stress become too high. And then, the storm passes because your kid gets a little bit older and stronger and more mature. It's actually 2 years, I think. By the time they turn 2, it starts to normalize a little bit. But those 2 years destroys families. 2 years destroys marriages. And so if you can help a family manage that time and then keep them together, that's a multi-generational win. And if there's a way we can make that happen as a country, then we should do it.
Moving on to another political issue of the day, Congress has effectively done nothing on immigration for the last 40 years. What is your plan to not only address it, but to do something about it?
I'm the son of immigrants myself. I believe immigrants make our country stronger and more dynamic in myriad ways. And my father, as I think you said in the open, Caitlin, he came to this country and generated 69 US patents for GE and IBM, which I think was a pretty big win for the country. And I remember when I was a teenager, I was old enough to figure out what a patent was, and I was like, hey Dad, how much do you get paid when you generate a patent? I was like, ooh, it's gonna be a lot of money. And then he was like $200, $300. And I was like, what? That doesn't seem like enough. And then he said, I also get a salary so I can feed, house, and clothe you and your brother. I was like, oh, okay, I get it. Anyway, we need to create a path forward for people who are here and undocumented in this country. Right now, it's an untenable situation because we're pretending we can deport 12 million plus people, which is insane, would destroy regional economies, would separate families. It's a non-starter. So then you say, okay, what are we doing now? And as you suggest, there's been no movement. Traditionally, this was a bipartisan issue. Marco Rubio and other Republicans said we need to have a path forward for people who are here undocumented.
Lindsey Graham.
Lindsey Graham too, yeah, that's true. So we need to create that path forward, essentially have a new status for people on the path to citizenship. And then over the long term, if they pay taxes and are positive in communities and avoid criminal records and pass certain checkpoints and thresholds, then eventually they become citizens of this country over time. I do want to say at the same time we do have to enforce the southern border. Like this is not like an open border situation. Like you're a country that needs to have a balance, and we're a country where a lot of people really want to live, and so you need to have some kind of structures and laws and boundaries. Now, at the southern border, here's the problem, really. Our southern border is very porous, it's very hard to protect, and it's very hard to staff. We paid Accenture $13 million to help hire people at the border. Guess how many people they hired with $13 million? 2. You can look that up. It's so dark. The fact is, when you get down to the border, you're in the middle of nowhere, it pays less than other roles, the work is miserable, the turnover rate is sky high. And so we can't protect the border in a real way. And then we're left with these terrible choices where when people show up and request asylum, your choices are either to detain them in inhumane circumstances or let them walk free and say, come back in 15 months when their hearing is. And of course, after 15 months, they don't come back. And so we have this system that's not working for anyone. We have to actually put some of the resources to work. And if it's not going to be people, because it turns out no one wants to do that job, then we have to find other ways to secure the border.
All right, so you have, like most candidates, spent a lot of your time in Iowa and New Hampshire over the last, I guess, 24 months now that you've been running.
Yeah, I've been to Iowa and New Hampshire 22 times each.
Yeah.
So I joke that they're like my kids, where when you visit one, you have to visit the other.
So we're the neglected third child over here. You have visited a few times.
Oh, don't put it like that, Jamie. I don't feel like a terrible parent. I didn't know about the third child. I just recently found out. I'll make up for lost time.
There you go. You have been here a few times. I think there was a fun jazzercise video of you down in Beaufort.
Oh my gosh, the Cupid shuffle. Wow. That was such a happy accident. I had no idea that would go viral.
So, how important, so South Carolina is the first state in the primary calendar that has a majority African-American population, whereas Iowa and New Hampshire are very white. So it is really a test of how candidates can perform with a more diverse voting population, which is much more reflective of the Democratic electorate nationwide. What role do you see South Carolina playing in your campaign strategy right now?
We've seen a great wave of support here in South Carolina, despite the fact that I have not spent as much time here. So we're excited to spend more time here. We have an incredible team here. I don't know if Heidi's anywhere where we can point to Heidi and Jermaine, and there's Jermaine, Jermaine Johnson. So we're going to invest more time here in South Carolina, in part because this state does represent a broader cross-section of the American people than some of the other early states. And it's one reason why you all have outsized importance. I was joking earlier, do you know how many Californians each of you is worth? About 250 each. So your votes are going to matter a great deal to who wins the nomination, in part because of the diversity here. And we've been investing in reaching people of color and people of different backgrounds to a higher degree. We need to do a lot more work, but we're doing more.
Oh, okay, good. I was worried I was in the cone of silence. The impeachment inquiry is taking center stage right now in Washington and around the country. Based on what you are seeing, do you think Congress should vote to impeach President Trump? Yes or no?
Yes, they should vote to impeach Donald Trump, but we should not have any illusions. There's not a single Republican that's crossed party lines to say that this is the right way to go. The odds of impeachment actually going all the way through and removing him from office strike me as vanishingly low unless you see a change of heart on the part of dozens of Republican senators, which does not seem plausible at all. So to me, our goal has to be to paint a positive vision and a new way forward for the country that gets people excited. And what I've been saying is that when we're talking about Donald Trump, we are losing. That includes when we're talking about impeaching Donald Trump. He thrives on attention, even negative attention. We have to be taking every opportunity to make a new positive case for the future that Americans can see themselves in and get excited about. And the Democrats' obsession with Donald Trump, to me, is a loser. Like, we have to actually start thinking bigger about the problems that got Donald Trump elected, which preceded Donald Trump. He's not the cause of all of our problems. He's a symptom. We have to cure the disease. And then you have to start trying to solve the problems moving forward. Because that's why Donald Trump won. The reason Donald Trump won is that tens of millions of Americans decided taking a bet on the narcissist reality TV star was the right way to go, because they felt like our government has completely fallen way behind the curve in actually responding to us. And then the feedback mechanisms are broken. And it's like, well, it can't get much worse, I'll take a chance on Donald Trump. And so the Democrats, to me, are taking the wrong lessons and message from that. Like, that to me is like very, very deep soul-searching type stuff. It's like, what the heck just happened? Like, and so then you have to look and say, what have we been doing that has not been enough? And the fixation on Donald Trump prevents that process from happening. I will also say, I've been campaigning this whole time. Do you know how many questions I've gotten about impeachment from a voter? Zero. Not a single voter has been like, oh, like, you know, you watched the impeachment hearing today? Like, that just hasn't happened to me. I mean, I'm sure people are watching and care, but like, you know, but it has not been the focus of any of the conversations I've been having with voters.
All right, so you have a few minutes left. We haven't asked you about foreign policy. I have sort of one a unique way to get into foreign policy a little bit. So I understand you're a basketball fan. The NBA has recently come under criticism for the way it handled Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey's tweet in support of Hong Kong protesters. China is, of course, a massive market for the NBA, and they were all kind of all over the place, but they didn't really defend his right to make that kind of statement, which China was obviously very upset about. You know, on a small scale, what do you think about that issue? But more broadly, what role and responsibility do American businesses and the American government have to uphold our values while we are working with countries, some of whom are increasingly intertwined with our economy, like China, that don't necessarily share the same?
I was thrilled that the Senate unanimously just passed a Defense of Hong Kong Democracy Act that would punish people who are involved with punitive action against the Hong Kong people. Like, the American people agree that Daryl Morey was right when he said, I stand with the people of Hong Kong. And you know who's wrong on this? It's the government of China. If the government of China had done nothing, you know how many people would have seen that tweet? 10? Like, who? You know what I mean? It's like, oh, Daryl Morey said, like, who cares? You know? It's like, it's just the Chinese government's hypersensitivity to anything that's like poking at issues that they're sensitive to, and then they like freak out. They like, you know, ban the Rockets. They like kick the NBA out. They do all of these things. To me, this is a very short-sighted move on the part of the Chinese government. I said at the time, I was like, this is a really dumb move on the part of the Chinese government, because like, if you ban the NBA in China, you know what would happen? Chinese people would find a way to freaking stream those games. Like, you know, like Chinese people would find themselves some NBA games, and while they're finding themselves some NBA games, they'd probably find themselves some other things too. This, to me, was just really painfully backward on the part of the Chinese government. But it's a sign of their priorities. The Chinese government has two priorities. Number one, maintaining robust economic growth. And then number two, maintaining social order. They're doing reprehensible things to some of their ethnic minorities that are even worse than what's going on in Hong Kong by an order of magnitude. So to your original question, there are problems coming down the pike. I will say, and this is as an avid NBA fan, we should be less concerned about whether a Chinese person in a rural province can watch an NBA game than by the fact that they're about to lap us in artificial intelligence because they have access to more data than we do, and the government is subsidizing AI to the tune of tens of billions of dollars. You know, it's like, that's like the real stuff. Like the NBA stuff, I love the NBA, I love basketball, but I mean, like even I recognize in the scheme of things, it's not that big a deal. I will say that someone in Hong Kong said something that really struck me, and he was right. He said, you all fought for freedom of speech, and now you're letting the Chinese government dictate what you can say on your own soil. You know, like, values are cheap until they start costing you money. It's like the NBA is like, oh, we're a champion for social progress, unless it costs us money. You know what I mean? Like, you know, it only shows what you stand for when there's a cost involved. When there's no cost, it's easy to be brave.
All right. We're coming up on the end of our program, and we're coming up on the portion that we call the lightning round. So we've got some quick fire questions for Mr. Yang, and then we will let you have the final 2 minutes. So take it away, Jamie.
All right, LeBron or MJ?
I would say MJ right now, but there's a chance that, you know, LeBron's career's not done, so, you know, who knows. I'll also say LeBron on a social impact level is above MJ, because what he's done with his school in Akron is amazing. The fact that he actually speaks out about issues is next level. So on that level, I would say LeBron.
Which internet meme is your favorite and why?
Of myself?
Of yourself, yes, let's go.
I'm a big Keanu Reeves fan, and there was this recent meme about him being like like in that Netflix movie that I just enjoyed immensely. It's amazing. Hope I get the chance to meet Keanu on the track.
In the trips that you have made so far, what is the best food you've had in South Carolina so far?
I'd have to say fried chicken. I don't know if that's that's creative or not, but I've had some delicious fried chicken here in the state.
You famously did a 10-hour question and answer session called Ask Andrew. In a few words, how would you describe that experience? Without swearing.
In 2 words?
In a few words.
In a few words?
I gave you some wiggle room.
Long but fun.
There you go.
There you go.
Which 2 books, one fiction and one non-fiction, have most influenced your life?
Nonfiction, there's a book called Built to Last that profoundly influenced my career. It talked about how if you build a quality organization, that's actually the most important thing, and what the organization does is an offshoot of that. And that's something that I've seen to be true. Nonfiction, there was a novel I liked a great deal called Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami that had an impact on me as a young man in particular.
A controversial one here. Is a hot dog a sandwich?
No.
Oh. Think about it.
It's a thinker. Do you have a hype song for yourself?
I've now been using Return of the Mac as my theme song for quite some time, and it is a hype song. I have very fond associations with that song now because, you know, I come down, there was one time it was like smoke machines and like fireworks and pyro. So that's my hype song now for sure.
Now, if you do not secure the nomination, what is your plan to stay involved and stay relevant? Or do you see this more as a one and done bid?
The problems that I'm running to solve are big and getting bigger all the time. And I think I said at the debates, like, you know, my first move was not to run for president because I'm not insane. But if you look at the magnitude of the problems, I looked up and said, what are the realistic solutions you have? And there's really nothing on the list except to try and take control of the government and have it rewrite the rules so that it works for us. If I don't win the nomination, the presidency, these problems are still going to be with us. I'm still going to be a parent. I'm still going to be an American. There's going to be plenty for me to do and the Yang Gang to do to help move the country forward, whether that's in government or outside of government.
Could you see yourself running for some other kind of office?
I'm in it to solve the problems. I've been asked to run for various offices, and to me, most of those offices would not help us move the ball forward. So if you look at it, it's almost impossible for any of the contiguous states to have a universal basic income, because then people would just like move across state lines and be like, yeah, I'm here now. You know, this is a national scale problem. You need national scale solutions. So I would not be attracted to most local offices.
If you do,
this despite the fact appreciation that, like, you know, local government officials do awesome work, and like I think it's powerful. It's just not something I would necessarily do myself.
if you do win the nomination, have you thought about who your vice president might be? And specifically, I'm curious, if you had to name someone who has run for president this cycle, which one would you want to be your vice president?
One fun thing about running for president is you actually bond with the other candidates because you're in the same green rooms as them and the same union halls and the same. So I text with a half a dozen other candidates. We like give each other words of encouragement and whatnot. I've not settled on a running mate yet. I would prefer to have a female running mate because I just think that would be really good for the country. But when you're building a team like this, so much of it is around a degree of trust that you have with someone who's going to be a partner at that level and who could be the next president. So I'm allowing those relationships to continue forming and building, but I'm glad to say that there are a number of people that are in the field that I believe I'll be working with in the days to come.
All right, and the final question of the day, we mentioned that you are very popular on Reddit, so we feel like we have to ask the ultimate Reddit question. Would you rather fight 1 horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses?
100 duck-sized horses.
Explain.
I think their ducks' size are relatively low to the ground, and their hood also is like not that high, and so like I feel like you'd have a better chance of kind of like keep them low and keep the damage restrained to like your ankles.
All right, and with that, we really appreciate everybody for coming out. Thank you so much. Andrew will stick around for a little bit, I hope, so you can hang out with the Yang Gang a little bit. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's it. Thank you, South Carolina. I love you. We cannot fix the problems without you taking the future of the country into your hands and letting the rest of America know it's not left, it's not right, it's forward, and that is where you must take us in 2020. Thank you so much. I love you all. Looking forward to this.
Put the money in our hands. 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 Can we afford it? Yes. Will it cause inflation? No. Is it awesome? Yes. Is anyone trying to make it happen? Yeah, that guy.